Dr. Paul Zeitz. Welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Now, I'm going to tell you a little scenario here. So one day, I think it was this month here in June, I was looking at the Today Show and I saw where some protesters had interrupted the congressional, I think it's an annual congressional baseball game. And I saw some of those folks jump out on the field, and the police were chasing them around and wrestling them down. And it made me also remember back to last year's U.S. Open, and I was watching Coco Gauff playing a set, and that whole match got interrupted because there were protesters of the same kind, climate protesters there. And so I was like, gosh, I wonder if that's some of the same people or what group that they're with. And so the next day, you and I were scheduled, or I think I might be getting my time frame wrong, but we were scheduled for a getting to know you chat. And I was waiting on you and you didn't show up. And I was like, oh, everybody gets their schedules messed up a little bit. Maybe I reached out to you and say, hey, we need to reschedule. And you said, you replied back, hey, I was arrested and held overnight. And I was like, what? I was like, what in the world? You did put a link to the article, and it was the same. It was the article reflecting that congressional baseball game.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I was like, oh, wow, this was Paul. So, Paul, were you one of the ones also with the U.S. Open?
No. I did get arrested twice last year in front of the White House. We were calling on President Biden to declare a climate emergency, and we thought we had the right to freedom of assembly and free speech. But we affixed a sign to the White House fence, and that is a federal misdemeanor. I was also, the first time it was just catch and release. And then the second time they kept me overnight in the DC jail system, which is basically not fit for humans. It's a torture chamber. Oh, I'm a white privilege guy, honestly, and it was all black and brown people. And it's just, I got a direct insult of the mass incarceration system that we're trapped in. And then, yes, one of the 8, I think we're called the Baseball Blockade 8. The 8 of us jumped onto the field. There were a younger group of, I think, 5 guys that jumped off a wall like 7 feet. And then when they did that, all the police ran after them. And then the 2-foot leap, which I had agreed to do, was available and open. So me and 2 women ran through that. And so 8 of us were on the field. And I was just like, by the time I got to the field, I was like, do not pummel me, please. Just, I come in peace.
Right. Let me just put my hands behind my back.
Yeah. So we were arrested and we were held overnight again for 21 hours. Then we were in 3 facilities. It was horrible. The conditions are subhuman. And I've been through it, and I'm a doctor. So I've been through the mental health wards. I've been through the ER. I've seen a lot. I've traveled all over the world. It was traumatizing for all these young kids. I was the old geezer. I was 62, and they were all 19, 21, 23, 27. This was the first time they had ever gotten arrested. So I was like glad that I could offer perspective and support, and they supported me as well. It was hard. It was tough.
Yeah, I understand. And let me just sidetrack for one
second. Thank you for
second.
connecting those dots, right? You connected the dots.
Yes, exactly. Let me sidetrack for a second and see, when you're arrested for protesting or that type of thing, do those arrests go on? Is that in the system and you have to get them expunged, or how does the law look at those?
It's a case-by-case basis. So the 2 arrests that I had last September the first one was like canceled with a ticket. And the second one, I was no papered, which means the 23 hours I was held overnight in a torture chamber my charges were dropped based on that. I still had to pay a fine. And then this time we're going to court. We have a trial July 11th, and we'll see. I hope they'll drop the charges. It's a ridiculous charge. we're making a political statement, and we wanted to interrupt the game, and we did.
Right.
We made the
Right.
game stop, and we made everyone understand that there is something going on where these people believe that there has to be an interruption, and we don't want Congress playing with our lives. We want a
Right.
livable future, and
Right.
we're not going to have it with what they're up to. So we're fed
No.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot going on. My sister, my oldest sister, was in the civil rights era of the 1960s. That's when she was going to college. And
Mm.
she always told me when I was a little girl, she said, the only time that it's okay for you to get arrested is if you are fighting for your civil rights. And I
Mm.
always kept that in my mind, and very important things like climate change and whatever have you. But
Yeah.
that I always kept that in my mind. And whenever I see people doing things for civil rights or the environment or abortion or these things that's so important and vital to our lives, I was like, hey, that's okay. But people still do need to know that you may be photographed and fingerprinted, and
Oh
this
yeah.
may go on your record. You may have to get it expunged. You may have to go to court. So even if it's for very serious, okay, positions, you were still processed.
Yeah, the system still will try to stop you. Yeah,
Right,
my work
exactly.
is really in the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. In my book, Revolutionary Optimism, I draw on his wisdom and his perspectives throughout the book, along with Gandhi and other leaders, global perspectives on what Martin Luther King called nonviolent direct action.
Correct.
And I'm calling it peaceful resistance. And you
Right.
can do that from your home, from your office, and you can get on the streets or do interruptive things like what we did a couple weeks ago. And there's an amazing thing happening right now is that fighting the capitalistic extractive system that's a conspiracy between fossil fuel companies, banks, and corporation and our government, which is pumping carbon pollution up into our atmosphere to the point where our future will not be livable.
Ugh.
Right? That's what's going on.
Oof.
And
Well,
it's the
let's
same caste system that does racial oppression and
right,
started slavery and oppresses women.
right,
So we're at a moment where we can heal from
right.
these systems.
Let's take a step back. And I read a little bit about your book, and it did remind me a lot of getting back to the Dr. Martin Luther King type of activism. But at your very core, professionally, you are a medical doctor, and you've done what possibly extensive work in epidemiology. And so people are going to want to know, how did a medical doctor get into this space of the protesting? You're said to be a veteran leader on the front lines of multiple global and domestic movements. How did you land here?
That's a great question. So I did go to medical school, and during that time, I decided to specialize in public health and preventive medicine, which really
Um,
is the health of the population. We also learned about the social determinants of health, like what contributes to being. And so I figured out pretty young that I had to enter the social, economic, and political sphere because that is what actually determines health outcomes and being for people. And we know very clearly that economically oppressed people of color, women in many parts of the world, are disadvantaged by the society. They're part of the oppression systems, and
mhm.
they have worse health outcomes and they have worse quality of life. And it's all linked actually to that thing. I'm actually getting at the root cause of the problems because I actually love all of humanity. That's where I'm at from all my travels and all my experiences. And we can do better than what's happening now. We can create a caste free world, meaning we
Yeah,
can get rid of the systems of oppression and we
right.
can create. This is the question I'm asking myself and everyone who will hear it now is what would it look like if I was living the path of love myself and I was putting love at the center of every word, every step, every breath, every action? That's what I'm working on. That's
Right.
part of revolutionary optimism. And the second question is, what would it look like if we put love at the center of our social, economic, and political systems? We treat each other. How would we relate to community? How would we relate to our ecosystem, our environment? Very differently than we are now. So I think
Yeah.
that's the inquiry I'm on. That's the conversation I want to create. That's the dialogue I'm hoping to spark political imagination. I don't have the answers. We do.
Right.
We have that ability
Right.
to figure this stuff out and create a better future. That's what I'm up to.
Paul, there's so many questions that I have because I understand how you want to lead with love. And then again, to make the analogy of Dr. Martin Luther King. But we are in such a we're in critical mass here in the world with all these different types of social problems and issues. We have wars going on. As the Bible says, we have rumors of wars and rumors of wars. We've got all this. We have had Roe v. Wade gotten rid of by the Supreme Court, but yet we are still talking about abortion. We're still talking about women's bodies. The conversation is about women, and you can't hear any women's voices really about abortion. You have the lingering effects that I'm still feeling from the George Floyd episode, and all of those people that was in a concentrated amount of time. Why there had to be a group called Black Lives Matter, because Black people were getting slaughtered every other week by police. So those issues and more rile people up. People are angry. People are saying Handmaid's Tale is around the corner. People are pessimistic, people frustrated. There are all these things. And can you tell me, those of us who are frustrated and angry, and people are feeling disenfranchised, people don't want to vote, they look at the two candidates that we have coming up in the November's election and they're like, oh, these are the only two choices? Or then you got these people that seem to be possessed and almost ready to raise their hands. So how can we get to this place that you're talking about, but still fight these heavy issues?
Thank you so much for sharing that question. So all those emotions that you described, frustration, anger, despair, hopelessness, skepticism, I have experienced all those emotions. And that is why I wrote Revolutionary Optimism, to help me navigate this passage that we're going through. Humanity is going through something right now.
It is.
We had the COVID disruption as an example of disruption. We're going to have more disruptions. We're going to have to deal with more crises. In fact, in the next 6 to 12 months, we could be dealing with a constitutional crisis. We could be dealing with political violence, and we could be dealing with an attempted coup attempt or something like that, which we've seen before.
Exactly. I thought about that as well. And then that was part of my questions. We got this contentious election coming up in November, and no matter which way it goes, I still see problems.
Exactly. So we have violent revolutions, as you so eloquently described, that are ongoing. The street violence, the police violence, the mass incarceration, the war machine. It's $1 trillion a year military industrial complex, 750 bases around the world. The US is the largest military empire ever in human history. And what does it do? It's the #1 polluter of carbon pollution, by the way.
Yes.
So it's all interrelated to this intersectional political transformation that I believe we're on the cusp of.
Yes.
And women's rights. Okay, so women got the right to vote 104 years ago in 1920. Yes. Still, all these years later, they're woefully inadequately represented in the Senate, in the House, and at the state and local level too. We're seeing an increase, but it's still like less than 25%. It's ridiculous after over 100 years. And we're now seeing an evisceration of women's rights, as you described, with the reversal of Roe v. Wade. We're going back into Byzantinia. We're going back into and so this is what is at stake here, is that we have this MAGA movement, which is racist by design. It's a fascist authoritarian movement. It's spreading globally. We see this in Israel with Netanyahu. We see it in Europe. It's happening in Africa. And it's a sign of the times. And so we have to rise now, is my invitation. We have to get on the streets. the way Reverend King explained to me in his work. But what I went to on a pilgrimage to Alabama earlier this year and went to
Mhm.
Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma. Fascinating, because what I really learned was that it was the women who rose and the women who led the movement, and men, but it was a collective. And it was all the people in the area. It was white people in the area, some, not a lot, but some. And it was a national support of that moment when those breakthrough, when the people on the ground said enough is enough. And
Yes.
that's really the invitation for you, your listeners, for women living in this time. We have to
Yes.
do, in my view, we should do everything we humanly can
Yes.
peacefully to prevent an authoritarian fascist takeover, because they're going to increase the oppression. They're going to put women out. They're going to put Black people out. They're going to put people like me that speak truth to power. I'll be shot. I mean, this is going to be a very dangerous time. And
Yes.
I don't think America should have to go through that. We're on a cliff. We're at the edge of the cliff. And I'm offering ideas and solutions, unlocking imagination, like your ideas, all your listeners' ideas. We have to expand our willingness to step into this moment.
Yes, it's a very dangerous and confusing moment. And people are like, what can we do? What can we do? And I do believe you're going to give us some charges of what we can do to go to navigate this very scary era. Because if we all are raging, that's not going to do anything. We can't all rage, but we can all be concerned, but channel this through some very purposeful steps. And I think you have your book, Revolutionary Optimism, 7 Steps for Living as a Love-Centered Activist, will give us some of those. Can you go through those?
Yeah, so I'll give you a quick overview of the whole thing, and then we can dive
Sure.
into each step quickly.
Okay.
The first half of the book, steps 1, 2, and 3, are really about our own journey of self-awakening, self-liberation, to live our highest power, our highest selves as love-centered activists. I actually start the book by saying I think 99% of us already are love-centered activists. So take a breath. You're already there. You don't have to
Okay.
be worried about not being enough. You are enough,
Okay.
and it's perfect. So then step 4 is the heartbeat of the book, and that's called peace crafting. So once we're optimizing ourselves, then peace crafting is how we relate to each other. And I have a set of practices and ideas about exploring peace crafting, the art of peace crafting. And then the last 3 steps are really about our collective liberation, imagineering, sparking peaceful revolutions, where I really draw on Reverend King's teachings about nonviolent direct action. I call it peaceful resistance. And I do all those stories you told about the congressional baseball game and the tennis match and the George Floyd mobilization. That began an area of reckoning that we're still in. That
Yes.
George Floyd moment. Wow,
Yes.
that was the largest protest in US history, and it went globally. That George Floyd, that racial reckoning, that shaking the foundations of racial caste,
It
that
did.
they were throwing down statues all over Europe of
Yes.
the slave owners. So
Yes.
like we're at a moment, we're still in that moment. We haven't fulfilled
Yes.
all that yet, but we're that era of reckoning began then. And it
Right.
was Black people and Black Lives Matter and all that, and white people rose too. And
Yes.
some of my Black friends have said they appreciated that. They really noticed that there was a distinct collective outrage that was
Exactly.
expressed on the streets. And I think that's what I hope to see more of that in this year ahead, as
Yes.
so that we can prevent an authoritarian takeover.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. And again, I have to repeat, it is very frightening indeed. But we have to do, as they say, a woo-saw moment and know that if we can peacefully collect together through these 7 steps, the things that hopefully we can defeat some of this unbelievable things that are going on today. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about some of the 7 steps, and then I want to ask you a question once all of those are presented to the audience.
Okay, thank you for that opportunity. You said
Mhm.
something really important I want to just touch on, which is a thread through the book, which is we are not alone. We are in this together. And that's a big part of the opportunity that I see with revolutionary optimism. In fact, there's even a journal and workbook for people to explore revolutionary optimism together in groups. And I think that's a really important way of building friendships, deepening solidarity, and so forth and so on. So, okay, step one is it's go time, like right here, right now. And it really helps the reader see that they are probably already a love centered activist. And I define the 4 circles of service: self, family, community, and country and world. And all love centered actions count. I would bet my life that your listeners are already love centered activists. They're taking care of themselves, they're taking care of their family, they're involved in their community, they're doing stuff in the world. So I want people to feel good about that. Step 2 is self liberation. And that's about freeing myself. I had a struggle in my life. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual violence at the hands of my father. And so I had a very severe trauma at an early age. And I was also blessed with love from my mom. And then I was able to pursue education and healing. And I figured this out in my late 40s. I had like flashbacks, and then a memory flood, and then a shattering, and then I rebuilt myself. But I had to fight what I call my inner dragon, which was that voice within my mind that told me I was not worthy, I was not good enough, I was stupid and ugly. And it would also be hypercritical, hyper judgmental of everyone else around me. It was in a kind of protective mode. So I offer a way of taming the dragon. I actually do a peace summit with the dragon, and I decided to have it present in case there's danger. I need my inner dragon. But most of the time I've been working on creating my brain to choose being my highest self, my loving self, my connecting self, my spiritual. That's who I want to be being in the world. And so that's self-liberation. Step 3 is about accessing unified consciousness. It's about accessing our connection with the great mystery, or people call it Jesus consciousness, or unity consciousness. It's called different things by different people. And I do cite a story in Martin Luther King's biography. He talked about the moment he gave up hope and he went to the kitchen at 4 a.m. and had a cup of coffee, and he got a divine message. He said, "You're on this. You got it. Have faith." And that was an example of having access to that and then using it when you need it. That's what it's. So then we go to step 4, which is peace crafting, which is what I said was how we relate to each other, how I'm relating to you, how you and I are relating to your listeners, every interaction, everywhere. And I created a peace crafting wheel that includes 4 parts. I'll quickly say them. Be a listening friend. Embrace multiple perspectives. Use only love speech. Lastly, build trust.
Yes.
And so that wheel, I have an imaginary wheel that I've implanted in my brain, and I'm like trying to get my brain to operate through peace crafting. And it's a practice. I'm not always using love speech, but now this implant that I created is like letting me know when I've gone off track. So it's a tool that I share. Then step 5 is Imagineering. It's about unlocking our imagination, our visions, our radical imagination. And I realized after I started sharing my book, a lot of people have big ideas, not just me. So, but the oppression system in our minds makes us not want to share it. We're afraid. And so I try to unlock that. And then I give the 10 best practices of love-centered movements, because we're not doing this alone. We're doing this together. And so I explain how you can do that at any level, what role you can play, how do you prioritize, what to focus on, things like that. Very practical. Step 6 is sparking peaceful revolutions, like the civil rights revolution that happened from 1955 to 1965 or 68. Like we're ready for that again, that kind of transformation. And I tell the steps, the tools, the principles, very practical. Step 7 is unifying within ourselves and unifying as our society and our country, so that we can make it through this transformation. Respond to the violent revolutions that you and I both talked about with a countervailing peaceful revolution, and at least try to direct it towards the arc of justice in a better way.
Right. Exactly. Wow, that's a lot, but that's a lot of positivity. And we need this pathway to help us navigate these perilous times, definitely. And the one thing when you said we're not alone, I was thinking all the while when COVID happened, and I tell various people this, one source of people, I'm Gen X. And so I think they weren't millennials. I can't remember who's after the millennials, but Gen Z. And so a lot of Gen Z people, particularly young women, were online, whether it was TikTok or Instagram, and they helped me a lot. People were talking a lot about self-care at that time.
Yeah.
And they began to throw out words that there were things that was like I had experienced, but couldn't put a name to it. I learned more about narcissists and how narcissist people do things and their processes. And then I discovered something very painful about my interaction with a narcissist. Then they talked about microaggressions, such as in racism. And I was like, you know what? I have been with certain white people at times, and they'll say something, and I'm like, that wasn't racist, but yet I couldn't put my finger on it. But there were microaggressions. And so they just made me learn and think about a lot of different things. And so I thought about intergeneration. This intergenerationality, we need that as well to be channeled into what you're talking about. And you did say we're not alone. You're talking about the unifying is diverse people. That's not just diverse as in race and men and women. It's also age. And people need to know we can learn a lot, whether you're Gen X or a boomer, you can learn a lot from a millennial or a Gen Z person too. We need to know that all people, no matter what their age, have value and have value in this process.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. In step 7, unifying, I do talk about intergenerational and the imperative of it. And my climate protest is a good example of that. I was with Gen Z and millennial, and I was the baby boomer. And the 8 of us cut through those 3 things. And I made the point about that to them. And that is really important. It also, they were terrified. And I was like, I've been through this before, so I could be a calm pseudo father. Figure during that experience. So it matters both tactically and operationally, like in that example, but also at every other level. I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree more. I have 5 sons that are millennials, and I guess my baby is Gen Z, I guess. Okay. I get acculturated and challenged. What's interesting, what I'm aware of is that younger generation and millennial and Gen Z, they've already decolonized their minds.
Yes, they have.
And I think that's the work of all of us. The oppression systems inside our minds that we were raised with, we were acculturated, the narratives, the structures, the systems, the Hollywood, all that created limiting beliefs in our minds. And that's what's so beautiful about Gen Z and millennials, is that they're further along the curve on that than even probably where I'm at now. I'm learning a lot from them. But also I have my own perspective too. Like, because I've been through 60 plus years of life. And I think sometimes I remember when I was that age, I thought I knew it all.
Yeah.
Now I know I don't know anything.
Yes. I have a 21-year-old son, and the things that he knows and tells me, it helps me a lot, the way they talk and think about a lot of different things. But they certainly have been decolonized to a great degree. Now, let's talk a little bit about Unify. And Unify is your nonprofit, is that correct?
It's an emerging movement building platform. It's now operating out of an LLC. And I have decided, I've ran multiple nonprofits and been part of many nonprofit boards. And I'm not personally wanting to do that again. So I'm I'm offering these building blocks for #Unify movements. It's about, and then I've started dialoguing, and I have over 100 people that I'm in conversation with about hashtag Unify USA, about
Mm-hmm.
building a movement that brings together an interpartisan, intergenerational, interracial, all the ways that we want to be connecting
Right.
for this perilous moment.
Right.
Like I don't think this needs to be around forever, but I think for an 18-month window, when
Right.
people are ready, I have the building blocks. When people want to create it, I'm happy to be part of it. I think there'll be a flashpoint where we're going to
Yes.
want to work together. And
Yes.
I'm part of a lot of networks and circuits, and that's what I'm focusing on. I'm in the space between all the movements. I'm in the Black Liberation Movement. They just had an equity march in Washington. They had a lobby day on the Hill. They had a meeting at the White House. We're bringing reparative justice, the healing of the original wound of our country, that slavery
Yes.
was legal in our
Yes.
Constitution, and
Yes.
racism is still legal today, as evidenced
Yes.
by police violence and mass
Systemic.
incarceration.
Yeah.
We have to face that truth. And so
Right.
we're offering a reparative justice package of reparations, truth telling, healing, and transformation. We wrote the executive order 4 years ago. Biden
Yeah.
hasn't done anything with it. Trump
Uh,
will never do anything with it.
no.
And we believe the time is right now for
Yes.
a healing. We have
Yes.
to acknowledge the role of the federal government in perpetrating these crimes and
Yes.
to apologize for these crimes. And then we can
Yes.
move on. And
We
we want
just
to do
talked.
reparations and truth telling.
We just talked about that this weekend. I went to a birthday party, and we just talked about that very same statement you just made.
Really? That's
And
great to
we were
hear.
like, has there ever been an apology, an official apology or anything? We were saying they did a Juneteenth, making that a holiday as like a little thing they threw out a few years ago, but it's not enough.
I couldn't agree more.
No.
And okay, give Biden credit for creating Juneteenth as a holiday. Give Obama credit for getting the MLK statue up and the African American History Museum done on the mall. But these folks, we hoped that they were going to be our Abraham Lincoln kind of transformational leaders that brought us a new level of freedom and healing from the caste oppression. But they're just part of it, actually. I actually believe Biden, the Democrat Republican system, they're two giant inner dragons just going after each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they maintain this overall oppression system over all of us.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
economic oppression, it's this destroying our future livability, all this insanity, really. And
Yes.
if you just put it over here, turn the volume down, the majority of us are exhausted from it. 80% of
Yes.
Americans don't want to deal with that. It's so
Right.
disturbing. Then we're over here in this space where we can create a new constitutional order. I've talked to a lot of African Black leaders in our country, and they don't want to necessarily call it a constitution. Maybe it's a covenant, or maybe it's a contract, or whatever. A new social contract on how we relate to each other and how we relate to the earth.
Yes.
So other countries have modified their constitutions to make sure that there's environmental relationship with the planet, because we're
Yes.
destroying it and making it unlivable. Anyway,
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's where a lot of people are at. It can't be fixed. We need to renew it and transform it, and let's just do it now before we have to face a fascist authoritarian rule. I don't
Right.
think it's going to be a long, drawn out process. I'm like saying, let's do it. We can do it as fast as possible.
Most definitely. I agree with you 100%. And one of the first steps we all need to take is going out and purchasing Dr. Paul Zeitz, Revolutionary Optimism, 7 Steps for Living as a Love-Centered Activist. Dr. Paul Zeitz, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been my honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.